Well, it's December, which for a lot of people, including myself, it's Christmas time. Now, whether or not you celebrate Christmas, I do hope that you're happy during this joyful time of year. The game I'm reviewing today isn't exactly Christmassy, but it is still relevant as the game came out 40 years ago this month, so I figured it was a good time to review ET on the Atari 2600. Now, you probably already know about this game, as many people cite it as one of the worst games of all time. But does it really deserve that title, or has this game been treated unfairly over the years? In June of 1982, the movie ET The Extra Terrestrial released in theaters. The movie was a huge success, so Steve Ross, CEO of Warner Communications, which was Atari's parent company, negotiated with Universal Pictures for the license to produce video games based on the movie. With the license in hand, Atari commissioned Howard Scott Warshaw, a well-known video game designer at the time, to develop a game for the Atari VCS based on the movie. In late July of 1982, he agreed and development began. However, Atari wanted to be able to release the game for Christmas of that year in order to capitalize on both the movie's success and on the holiday season sales. That being the case, the game needed to be finished by September 1st of that year in order to allow time for production and marketing, meaning that Warshaw only had about 6 weeks to develop the game. He met with Steven Spielberg, director of the movie, to discuss the game. Spielberg wanted a concept similar to Pac-Man. However, Warshaw thought that was boring and had a more complicated idea for something entirely new. Given the short time frame he had to make the game in, Warshaw probably should have just made a Pac-Man clone. However, he decided instead to proceed with his idea. The result? Atari produced roughly 4 million ET game cartridges, and by the end of 1982 they had sold more than 2.6 million copies of the game. However, over 600,000 copies were later returned by unsatisfied customers, and well over 1 million cartridges went unsold. Even at the time, the game was very negatively reviewed, and it's now considered one of the worst games ever. Some people consider this game to be a large contributing factor to what's known as the video game crash of 1983. The video game crash was a major recession in the North American video game market that started in 1983. The home video game market had become oversaturated with consoles and poor quality games. This, in addition to the popularity of the home computer, led to a major decline in the sales of both consoles and games. This lasted until 1985, when Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America. Now, the crash had a lot of contributing factors which I'm not going to go into here. Maybe someday I'll make a dedicated video talking about it. However, I want to point out that while ET's poor sales performance may have contributed some, I feel like the crash would have happened either way, so I think it's a bit unfair to say that ET on the Atari was a major contributing factor. Well, now that you know a little bit about the history, let's take a look at the game itself. One thing of note, I really like the artwork when you first start up the game. It looks really nice. This is kind of misleading for the rest of the game, however. The graphics here are pretty much what you would expect for the Atari. Everything's blocky and nothing really has too much detail, and that doesn't bother me really, as it's what's expected for the Atari. What bothers me is that ET's green. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but I'm pretty sure ET is not supposed to be green. In ET, players control ET himself as they explore 6 sites on Earth to collect the 3 pieces of ET's phone, call his ship, and leave the planet. And yes, I called the different screens sites because that's what the manual called them. I know, it's not very creative. As you explore, you'll slowly lose energy. You can refill your energy by eating Reese's Pieces. If you run out of energy, Elliot can revive you up to 3 times. After that, it's game over. 4 of the screens in the game have deep pits, and the pieces of ET's phone are randomly in some of those pits. So the game basically consists of ET falling into a hole, trying to find the parts of his phone, and then raising his head up and flying out of the pit. Now again, it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I'm pretty sure none of that happened. These pits are probably the most infamous and infuriating part of the game. This is because it's way too easy to fall into them. The collision detection with the edge of the pits is way too sensitive, and players will often fall right back into the pit immediately after getting out. This can lead to the player getting into a loop of falling into a pit and flying out over and over again, and it's infuriating as it wastes a lot of your energy. However, In my opinion, that's not even the most annoying part of the game. While you're running around looking for the parts of the phone, a scientist and an FBI agent are after you. The scientist will grab ET and take him to his lab. Once you're there, you can just leave, but it can be incredibly annoying to try and find your way back to where you were. However, this isn't nearly as annoying as the FBI agent. If the agent touches you, he'll take one of your phone pieces away and hide it in a pit. And sometimes he seems to barely get near you but manages to take a piece. It's so annoying, and it can make the rounds drag on forever if you can win at all. You could say that these two are a good idea, as they introduce some difficulty into this game. However, I think they appear way too frequently. It seems at least one of them is almost always on the screen, so instead of focusing on finding the phone pieces, you end up spending most of your time running from either the scientist or the FBI agent. Now, you can make them go back to their bases, but this can only be done at a few spots and they come back almost instantly. The biggest problem with how frequently they appear is that if they're on the screen, your ship won't come to pick you up, even if you somehow manage to get all 3 phone pieces. Now, it's possible that Warshaw actually knew these two made the game almost impossible, as you can turn them off using the difficulty switches on the console. However, turning them off makes completing rounds so easy there really isn't any point in playing. Probably one of the more convoluted parts of the game is the special spaces. For some reason, there are certain parts of each screen that, when you stand on them, will make a little icon appear at the top of the screen. Pressing the button on the controller at each of these spaces will make something happen. Now there's one space somewhere you use to call home, and another to stand on when the ship arrives to take ET home. You need to find these 2 spaces in order to win a round. Now, luckily the space where the ship appears is always going to be in the forested area, but the space to call home I think can be anywhere. Now the most useful spaces are the question marks. If you press the button on one of these, you might see a flashing dot in one of the pits. This indicates that a piece of the phone is down there. The worst of these spaces are the arrow ones. Pressing the button on one of these will warp ET to the next screen in the direction of the arrow. You might think this would be useful for getting around faster. However, more often than not, when you do this, you're going to end up landing directly on a pit, and this can trigger that infuriating event of getting stuck in the loop of falling in a pit and floating back out. The big problem with these spaces is that there's no indication of where they might be, and the locations are randomized each round. This wouldn't be such a big problem if they were just there to help the player, but you need to find 2 unique spaces in order to beat each round, so I feel like there should have been some indication of where they are. So the question I had in my mind the first time I played this was, is this game's legacy deserved? As I've said before, a lot of people consider this to be one of the worst games of all time, and that it's very broken and has bad graphics and stuff like that. Now, I'm not even going to worry about the graphics, because by today's standards, yeah, they're bad, but by the Atari standards, they were actually alright. As for the game's concept, I actually love it, as it was very unique for the time. Now, yes, the game is really broken. Falling in the pits over and over can get really annoying really fast. However, I don't really think that's Warshaw or the game's fault. I think the biggest problem with the game is just how little time Warshaw had to develop it. He had about 6 weeks. Now, the Atari is not the most complicated system, but even with that, 6 weeks is not enough time to develop and thoroughly test a game. I feel like if he had had more time to develop and test it, this actually could have been a really good game. Now, as for if it caused the video game crash, no. I feel like the crash was inevitable whether or not ET came out. I feel that history and the internet have treated this game really unfairly, as it's not Warshaw's fault that it's not great, it's Atari's fault. They rushed the game to market in order to try and make as much money as possible. The only way to consistently beat rounds is to turn the agent and scientist off, and that basically takes away all the challenge, so it's not really even a game at that point. Unless you're a die-hard Atari collector, this game would be better left as an interesting piece of history rather than a part of your collection. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Have you played ET on the Atari before? What are your thoughts on it? I'd really like to know if anyone actually enjoys this game. Please let me know down in the comments. Well, until next time, so long.